It's late and the world feels thinner at this hour. Sounds carry farther, even small ones. A floorboard settling, breath moving in and out. I'm sitting still, letting the quiet do most of the work. That's how these stories begin anyway, not with announcements, but with waiting. Before people marked walls or pressed signs into clay, they carried things differently, in their bodies, in their habits, in the way they paused before speaking. Some stories were told because someone asked. Others came out only when the fire had burned low and there was no reason to rush back to sleep. I think about how much effort it took to remember, how forgetting wasn't a mistake yet, just a risk that followed everyone around. You learned by watching hands. You learned by repeating what you heard, even if you didn't fully understand it. Some nights you listened. Other nights you spoke, even when your voice shook a little. There's a feeling that comes with this part of the human story, not pride exactly, more like persistence, a sense of staying, of carrying something forward without knowing where it would land. I reach for a glass and find it empty. I set it down. This is where the story starts to move. I keep thinking about how little stayed behind in those early stretches of time, not because people didn't care, more because there was nowhere for things to stay. You walked, and the ground took your weight, then slowly let it go again. A path showed itself only after many feet passed the same way. Even then, it could vanish with rain or new growth. Nothing announced permanence. People learned to watch each other closely, not out of suspicion, out of need. A hand lifting slightly meant stop. 2 fingers meant something else. No one paused to explain it. You learned by being wrong once, maybe twice. After that, your body remembered. Words mattered, but they weren't everything. Tone carried weight. A story told too fast meant danger. A story slowed down meant it was safe to listen. I imagine a group settling in after a long day, not sitting in a perfect circle, just finding spots that felt right. Someone squats. Someone leans against a rock that's still warm. A child drags a stick through the dirt, making the same shape over and over without knowing why. The lines don't mean anything yet. They're just something to do with the hands while the ears stay open. Stories begin without ceremony. Someone clears their throat. Someone else interrupts halfway through with a correction, not sharply, just enough to nudge it back on course. No one gets offended. The story doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to the group. If a detail changes, it changes. If it helps people remember where water was found or which season was hardest, that's enough. Loss sits quietly in all of this, not spoken about but felt. Someone who used to tell a story doesn't show up one evening. The story still gets told. It sounds a little different. A pause falls in a new place. No one points it out. The absence becomes part of the shape of things. Memory stretches to cover the gap. There's effort here. Remembering takes work. You can see it in faces tightening when someone speaks, in the way people lean in just a little. Forgetting isn't shameful yet, but it's risky. A missed detail could mean walking the wrong way the next day, or trusting the wrong sign. So people repeat things, again and again. The repetition isn't dull, it's grounding. Sometimes the stories are short, barely stories at all, more like instructions wrapped in rhythm. Other times they wander. They pick up extra moments, small side paths. Someone laughs at the wrong place. Someone else stays quiet longer than expected. The group adjusts without talking about it. This is how memory stays alive, by moving. The ground plays its part. It receives everything without comment. Feet scuff it smooth. Knees press into it. Ash falls and gets brushed aside. A child presses a thumb into damp soil and watches it fill back in. That's how most things go. Nothing holds its shape for long. People learn not to expect it. And yet there's care, in the way elders slow down certain phrases, in the way younger listeners stop fidgeting when they recognize a familiar turn in a story. There's pride, but it's quiet, more like relief. We still know this. We haven't lost it yet. I think about how shared this all was. Memory wasn't stored inside one head. It moved, passed hand to hand, voice to voice. If someone stumbled, someone else picked it up. There was no record to consult, no place to check. Only the group, only the moment. At At some point, the night deepens, the fire sinks lower or the light fades, someone stretches their legs, someone yawns without apology. The story trails off, not because it's finished, but because it's enough for now. It will return when needed. It always does. As time passes, something subtle begins to change, though no one names it. The stories keep moving, but they start to press a little harder against the limits of memory. There are more of them now, not because life has grown more complicated on purpose, but because living adds weight without asking. More places to remember, more warnings, more small lessons learned the difficult way. You can feel the strain in the pauses. Someone stops mid-sentence, staring at the ground, searching. Another person quietly supplies the missing piece. No one thanks them, no one needs to. The handoff is smooth. Still, the pause lingers just a breath longer than it used to. It leaves a mark, even if nothing else does. People begin to lean on habits to keep things steady. Certain stories are told at the same time each day. Others are only spoken after everyone has eaten. The order matters, though no one says why. A story told too early doesn't settle right. Told too late, it slips away. Timing becomes part of the memory. So does place. A warning shared near the water carries a different weight than the same words spoken on open ground. Objects start to gather meaning, even if they aren't meant to last. A smooth stone passed from one speaker to the next. A broken tool set aside and pointed to while a story unfolds. Someone rubs the edge of it with their thumb as they talk. The motion helps. You can see their shoulders loosen once their hands have something to do. Memory, again, working through the body. Children watch all of this closely. They aren't invited to speak yet, not often, but they're learning when to look up, when to stay quiet. One child mimics the way an elder nods at certain points. Another practices the rhythm of a phrase under their breath, barely audible. They don't understand everything, but understanding isn't the goal. Holding on is. There are disagreements. They don't flare up dramatically, they simmer. Someone insists a path bends left, not right. Someone else remembers it differently. The group listens. They weigh the voices not by volume but by history. Who has walked that path most recently? Who returned safely? Eventually, a version settles, not because it's perfect, but because it will do. What's interesting is how little anyone worries about exactness. Precision isn't the measure yet. Usefulness is. A story that keeps people alive can be rough around the edges. A story that's elegant but leads nowhere doesn't last. These choices are made quietly, without debate. Survival edits the memory. At night, when bodies are tired, the stories change shape again. Voices soften, details blur at the edges. Someone might forget a name entirely and replace it with a gesture, a tilt of the head, a sweep of the arm. Everyone understands. The meaning carries through even when the words falter, sometimes especially then. There's a moment I keep coming back to. A person sits apart from the others, mending something simple, a strap, a net. Their hands move steadily while a story carries on nearby. They aren't looking at the speaker, but they're listening. You can tell by the way their hands pause at the right moments. Memory doesn't always face forward. Sometimes it works sideways. Loss continues to thread through everything. Someone who knew a story better than anyone else grows quieter over time. Their voice thins. Others begin to take over more often, not out of disrespect, out of preparation. When the voice finally stops, the story doesn't. It stumbles once, maybe twice, then finds its footing again. That's how it has to be. The ground still erases most things by morning. Footprints soften, lines traced during the day vanish. But something else is happening now. People linger a little longer over certain spots. A place where many stories have been told feels different underfoot. Packed, smoothed. The earth remembers pressure even if it forgets shape. By the end of this stretch, memory is heavier than it used to be, still shared, still moving, but carrying more. People feel it in their backs, in their throats. They don't complain, they adjust. They slow down where needed. They repeat what must be repeated. And somewhere in all of this, the idea of holding a story still, just for a moment, begins to feel less impossible. There's a stretch of time where nothing obvious changes, and yet everything feels slightly off balance. People still speak, still listen, still pass stories along the way they always have, but the weight of holding it all is more noticeable now, not heavy enough to stop anyone, just enough to make shoulders ache at the end of the day. Some stories start to feel crowded. They brush up against each other in the telling. A warning bleeds into a memory. A lesson carries an extra detail that doesn't quite belong, but no one removes it. There isn't time, or maybe there isn't certainty, so it stays. Memory swells where it can. People grow more careful about who speaks when, not in a strict way, more like a shared understanding. Certain voices come forward for certain kinds of stories. A steady voice for roots, a softer one for losses. Someone with quick hands talks while working, the rhythm of their motion keeping the words in place. Someone else only speaks when asked, and when they do, the group goes quiet. There are moments when memory slips, and everyone feels it at once. A pause stretches too long. A familiar ending does arrive. Someone clears their throat and tries again from the beginning. The second attempt isn't better, it's just different. The group listens anyway, letting it land where it will. Physical things keep helping, even if no one says that's what they're for. A notch carved into a stick to count something that matters. A pile of stones moved from one side of a clearing to the other as days pass. These aren't messages yet. They don't explain themselves, but they sit there, steady, waiting to be pointed at, waiting to be remembered around. I picture a person kneeling, adjusting one of those stones without much thought, just making the pile neater. The movement is small, almost absent-minded. Still, it changes how the next story is told. The speaker gestures toward the stones, and everyone knows what part of the story has arrived. No words needed for that piece. Children begin to test their voices more often now, not formally, not with permission. They repeat fragments while playing. They get details wrong. They mix stories together. Sometimes an elder corrects them. Sometimes they don't. There's a sense of letting things breathe, of trusting that what matters will settle on its own. Some nights feel longer than others. The stories drag. People grow restless. Someone stares into the dark instead of listening. Another person rubs their eyes and shifts position. Memory doesn't flow easily every time. On those nights, stories end early or break apart. No one forces them back together. There will be another chance. What's different now is the waiting, not the waiting for a story to be told, but the waiting for it to hold. People begin to wonder quietly if there's a way to make certain things stay where they're put. The thought isn't clear yet. It doesn't arrive as an idea. It shows up as a feeling, a hesitation before letting a detail go. The ground still takes everything back. That hasn't changed, but people notice how long it takes. A footprint lasts longer in dry soil. A line scratched into a rock face holds until someone rubs it away. These observations aren't written down. They're just noticed, filed away without comment. There's no moment where someone decides to change how memory works. No announcement, no agreement, just a slow leaning toward something steadier. People linger with their hands on surfaces a second longer than before. They trace familiar shapes even after the story has moved on. The gesture calms them, anchors something. By now, memory is no longer light. It's not fragile either. It has muscle. It can carry distance, but it needs help. Everyone can feel that, in the way voices grow hoarse, in the way stories are repeated one extra time just to be safe. At the edge of this chapter, people are still living without marks that last, still trusting voices and bodies to do the work, but the idea of leaving something behind, something that doesn't need a speaker standing next to it, has begun to take root, quietly, without certainty. Nothing has been written yet, but the ground is being looked at differently. The group doesn't feel small anymore, not cramped exactly, just fuller, more faces to read, more voices to track. When people gather now, it takes longer to settle. Someone is always still arriving. Someone else is finishing a task before they sit. The stories wait for that, stretching themselves around the delay. Remembering has started to feel like carrying a load, not unbearable, but constant. There are more things that need to be kept close, names of places that didn't matter before, signs that mean danger only at certain times. People don't talk about this shift. They feel it instead, in the way their backs stiffen when a story runs long. Repetition becomes deliberate. A story told once is never enough anymore. It comes back later in the day, then again after dark. The words change slightly each time, shaped by light and hunger and tiredness, but the center stays steady. You can hear it land in the same place, like a foot finding a familiar stone. Someone has started carrying a carved stick. It's nothing special to look at. Rough, uneven, marks cut into it at different depths. While speaking, they turn it slowly in their hands, thumb tracing the grooves without thinking. The motion steadies their voice. When they pause, the stick pauses too. Everyone watches both, even if they don't realize it. Listening takes effort now. People don't drift the way they used to. Eyes stay forward, bodies angle toward the speaker. If someone's attention wanders, another person shifts, clearing their throat or adjusting position, bringing the group back together. Forgetting isn't harmless anymore. A missed warning can cost time or safety. Everyone knows this, though no one says it out loud. Silence grows more complex. It isn't just absence, it carries meaning. Sometimes a story stops halfway through, not because the speaker is done, but because no one needs the rest. The quiet that follows is thick but comfortable. People nod. Someone exhales slowly. The ending is understood without being spoken. Memory shows itself in posture, the way a person stands when telling a long story versus a short one, the way they plant their feet when speaking about something dangerous, the way their shoulders soften when the memory is familiar. These details are read as carefully as words, maybe more carefully. There are moments when the weight shows. A speaker falters, not because they don't know the story, but because there's too much of it pressing at once. Another person steps in, finishing the thought without taking over. It's a practiced exchange. No one loses face. The story continues, carried by more than one voice. Objects multiply quietly. A bundle of stones tied together with a strip of hide. A piece of wood with a notch that wasn't there before. These things don't replace stories. They sit beside them. When touched, they pull certain details forward, like a handle you can grab when your hands are full. Children notice this shift too. They start to copy not just words but movements. The way a stick is held, the way stones are counted before speaking. They imitate the pauses. They don't always get it right. That's fine. The shape of remembering matters more than precision. The ground is still involved. People sit in the same places when certain stories are told. A warning is spoken near the edge of camp. A memory of loss stays closer to shelter. Over time, these spots become charged, even if they look the same as anywhere else. Feet know where to stop. At the end of the day, when light fades, the stories sound different. Voices lower, details soften, but the core holds. That's the test now, not whether a story is perfect, but whether it can survive the change in conditions. Day to night, calm to fear, full bellies to empty ones. Remembering has weight, yes, but it also has shape. People are learning how to hold it without dropping everything else. As the weight settles in, people begin to adjust without calling it adjustment. No one steps back to look at the whole thing. They just make small changes where they can. Someone shortens a story that used to wander. Someone else adds a pause that wasn't there before, letting listeners catch up. These are practical choices, not artistic ones. Mornings feel different now. Stories told at first light are sharper. People are standing more often than sitting. Hands are busy. Someone tightens a strap while listening. Someone else chews slowly, eyes fixed on the speaker. The words move faster in the morning. There isn't much patience for extra turns. You get the shape of the thing and move on. At night, it's another matter. The same story stretches out. Details slip in that didn't appear earlier. A sound from the dark interrupts, and the speaker waits until it passes. The pause becomes part of the telling. Listeners lean closer without realizing it. The core stays the same, but it feels heavier here, pressed down by shadow and tired bodies. Repetition does its quiet work. A phrase said the same way every time, a warning that always begins with the same breath in. People recognize these signals before they know why. The body responds first. Shoulders tighten. Someone shifts closer to the group. The mind follows a moment later. The carved stick changes hands sometimes, not often. When it does, the new holder treats it carefully as if it could break even though it's solid. They trace the marks in a different order. It throws them off at first. The story stumbles, then it finds its rhythm again. The object doesn't dictate the memory, it just gives it somewhere to land. There are days when too many stories compete for space. Someone begins one and is gently stopped. A hand lifts, not now, later. The story waits, held in the speaker's posture in the way they don't fully relax. Everyone can see it waiting. That kind of restraint is new. It takes effort. Silence is used more deliberately too. A long pause can mean danger. A short one can mean agreement. People learn these distinctions by living with them, not by being told. A child speaks out of turn and the group stills. No one scolds. The silence does the work. The child learns to read it. Forgetting still happens. It always will. But now it leaves a mark, not visible. You feel it in the way a story has to be patched together, in the way listeners exchange looks, checking their own memories against each other. The group corrects itself slowly, like a body finding balance after a misstep. There's a physical cost to all this holding. Throats grow sore, voices roughen. Someone stops speaking for a while, saving their voice for when it's truly needed. Another person takes over more often, not because they're better, but because they can. Memory is shared labor. It shifts according to strength. Certain places become known for certain kinds of remembering. Near the water, stories about movement and distance. Near shelter, stories about loss and care. People don't mix them much. It doesn't feel right. Standing in the wrong place can flatten a story or make it too sharp. The body knows where it should be. At times, the weight feels almost too much. A speaker hesitates, breath caught, the group waits. Someone passes them a drink. They take a small sip, then continue. The story comes out slower, but it comes out. No one rushes them. The waiting is part of the work now. What's clear is that memory no longer floats. It presses down. It asks for structure, even if no one knows what that structure will be yet. Objects help. Habits help. The body helps. All of it together keeps things from spilling. By the end of this stretch, remembering is no longer just something that happens. It's something people do on purpose, even if they couldn't explain how. They feel the weight in their hands, in their stance, in where they choose to stand before speaking. The stories hold. Over time, the weight stops surprising anyone. It doesn't get lighter, but people learn where it sits best. They shift it from one shoulder to another. They rest it briefly, then lift it again. Remembering becomes part of daily movement, like carrying water or tools. You notice it most when someone sets it down. There are moments when a story is deliberately left unfinished, not because the speaker forgets, but because finishing it would press too hard. The group accepts this. The missing piece stays present in the quiet that follows. People glance at one another, then look away. The story will be completed another time, or maybe not at all. Both are allowed. The carved stick wears down. The grooves soften from touch. New marks appear, added carefully, then rubbed smooth. Someone debates where to place one, holding the blade still for a long moment before cutting. Others watch, not interfering. When it's done, no one comments. The next telling adjusts around it naturally. Memory continues to live in the body. You can see it in the way someone inhales before a familiar phrase, in the way their feet shift when they approach a difficult part. Some speakers close their eyes briefly, not for drama, but to feel where the story sits. When they open them again, the group is ready. Children are trusted more now. They're asked to repeat small pieces, not entire stories, just the parts that matter most. A direction, a warning. They speak carefully, aware of the attention. Their voices waver. Someone nods encouragement without smiling. When they finish, the group doesn't clap or praise. The lesson isn't about performance, it's about holding. There are nights when the weight feels shared evenly, stories flow, voices trade places without effort, laughter breaks out at unexpected points, then fades. These nights feel rare, even if they aren't. People remember them fondly because they feel light. Other nights are harder, words resist, memory drags. Someone insists on repeating a story again, even though everyone already knows it. No one stops them. Repetition has become a kind of reassurance. Saying it again proves it's still there. Silence still matters. Sometimes it's used to let memory settle. Sometimes it signals that something has been carried far enough for now. People grow skilled at reading this. They don't rush to fill gaps the way they once did. Waiting has value. The environment continues to shape everything. Wind pulls words apart. Rain forces people closer. Cold shortens stories. Heat stretches them. Memory adapts. It always has. The difference now is that people are aware of the adaptation. They notice when a story shifts because of where they are standing or how tired they feel. At a certain point, someone realizes they can tell the same story in two different ways, depending on what's needed. Short and sharp, long and careful, both are true, both are remembered. This flexibility keeps memory from breaking under its own weight. Objects remain helpers, not replacements. If a stick is lost, the stories don't vanish. There's a moment of disorientation, then adjustment. Someone makes a new one. It isn't the same. It doesn't need to be. Memory flows around the loss, the way it always has. By now, forgetting has a shape too. It shows up as hesitation, as repetition that doesn't quite land, as a story that needs more voices than before. These signs are read and responded to without blame. Forgetting is part of the system, always has been. At the close of this chapter, people are still speaking their history into the air, still trusting voices, hands, and bodies to do the work. The weight of remembering hasn't pushed them to fix it yet. It has only taught them how to carry it together. But the pressure is steady. And pressure, given time, changes things. Fire changes how people arrange themselves before it changes anything else. Bodies drift inward without discussion, not close enough to crowd, but close enough to feel the warmth on shins and palms. Someone nudges a log with their foot. Sparks lift and vanish. Faces come in and out of light, never holding one shape for long. Listening slows here. It has to. The fire sets the pace. You can't rush words when flames are moving like that, stretching, then pulling back. A story that runs too fast feels wrong by the fire. It skids. People sense it and wait, even if the speaker doesn't realize why they've paused. Someone sits with a stick in their hand, stirring embers in small, careful circles. They don't look up much. Their eyes stay on the fire, tracking where the coals are brightest. When they speak, their voice rises and falls with the motion of the stick. The story moves in loops instead of lines. No one interrupts, not because they aren't allowed, but because it would break the shape. Across from them, someone chews something tough and dry. You can hear it when the fire dips. They nod now and then, not in agreement exactly, more like recognition. The nods come at familiar points. The story hits them like expected steps on a path. These aren't performances. No one stands. No one gestures broadly. If someone forgets a detail, they shrug and keep going. Another voice might fill it in, quiet and quick, like adjusting a blanket without waking anyone. Mistakes don't stop the story. They're absorbed. The fire holds people in place. Even those who tend to wander stay put longer than usual. The warmth presses against backs and knees. It makes leaving feel like effort. Outside the circle, the dark presses back. It doesn't move, but it's there, reminding everyone why they gathered this way in the first place. Shadows do strange work. They exaggerate small movements. A hand lifted slightly becomes large on the ground behind. A nod turns into a full bow. The story gains extra motion without anyone adding to it. Children watch the shadows as much as the speaker, sometimes more. They learn the story that way 2, through scale and flicker. Stories near the fire stretch. They linger on moments that would be skipped in daylight, the pause before a choice, the sound of something moving just out of sight. These details settle into the group differently, slower, deeper. People feel them in their chests before they understand them. There's room here for stories that don't fit elsewhere, stories that trail off, stories that circle the same moment more than once. Someone starts a sentence, stops, then begins again from a different angle. No one rushes them. The fire gives permission to take time. As the night goes on, voices lower without being asked to. The fire shrinks, logs collapse inward with a soft sound. Someone pulls their knees closer. Another wraps an arm around themselves, rubbing warmth back into their hands. The stories adjust to the smaller light. They become quieter, more contained. Some stories only live at this volume. They don't survive daylight or distance. They come out when faces are half seen and names don't need to be said. Loss sits closer to the surface here. So does fear. People speak it carefully, not wanting it to spread beyond the circle. There are moments when the fire does most of the talking. A story pauses and no one picks it up right away. The crackle fills the space. Someone sighs, another shifts their weight. The pause is allowed to stay. Not everything needs to be filled. Eventually, someone stirs the embers again, bringing a little more light back. A new story begins, or an old one resumes. The transition is smooth, almost unnoticed. Fire makes these shifts easier. It blurs edges. When the flames lower for good, when only coals remain, voices soften further. Stories thin out, details are fewer. What's left is what matters most. The rest can wait or disappear. No one argues with that at this hour. By the time people begin to drift away from the fire, the stories have settled into them differently than before. Warmer, slower, less sharp, but harder to shake. The fire doesn't keep anything forever. It just gathers it long enough to be shared. As nights repeat themselves, people begin to notice patterns in how stories behave near the fire. Certain ones return again and again, not always in the same order, not always told by the same voice, but they find their way back, drawn by warmth and habit. These stories don't announce their importance, they just keep showing up. Someone starts preparing the fire earlier than before. They gather wood with care, testing weight, snapping smaller pieces to fit just right. The act becomes part of the evening. Others watch, half listening to the sound of splitting wood, while a story begins nearby. The preparation steadies everyone. It gives the night a shape before the words arrive. Once the fire is lit, people choose their places without discussion. The same spots most nights, a flat stone, a worn patch of ground, a place close enough to feel heat but far enough to see faces. Over time, these positions take on meaning. You expect certain voices from certain angles. If someone sits elsewhere, it's noticed, even if nothing is said. The fire changes how memory is handled. Stories grow less urgent. There's no need to rush through them to get back to work or travel. This makes room for hesitation, for uncertainty spoken out loud. Someone admits they don't remember a part clearly. The group absorbs this without tension. Near the fire, not knowing feels safer. Objects shift hands more slowly here. The carved stick rests across knees instead of moving constantly. Stones stay piled near the edge of the light. When someone touches them, it's deliberate. The contact grounds them before they speak. You can see it work. Their voice steadies, their shoulders drop. Children grow bolder in this setting. They inch closer to the fire, watching faces instead of shadows now. One child leans too far forward and is gently pulled back by the edge of a cloak. No words, just a hand. The lesson lands. Safety is part of the story too. Mistakes happen more openly by firelight. A detail is wrong, a sequence out of order. Someone corrects it quietly or not at all. Accuracy loosens its grip here. What matters is the feeling carried through the telling, the warning, the lesson, the shared memory of how it felt to be there, even if no one was. Some nights the fire burns unevenly. Smoke drifts low, stinging eyes. People cough and shift. The story continues through it, adjusting pace, breaking briefly when someone turns away. These interruptions don't ruin the telling, they weave into it. Memory isn't separate from discomfort, it grows alongside it. There are nights when the fire draws out stories that haven't been told in a long time. Someone clears their throat and begins, then stops, unsure. The fire crackles, someone else nods, encouraging without words. The story resumes, slower now. It carries weight. You can feel the group leaning in, not physically, but inwardly. Loss speaks more clearly here. Names are said softly, sometimes only once. Faces are lowered. A hand presses against the ground, feeling its coolness through dirt and ash. The fire doesn't erase grief. It contains it, just enough to let it be shared without overwhelming anyone. As the fire sinks, stories become selective. People choose carefully what to bring out next. There isn't time for everything. A long story might be cut short. A small one might be given space it never had before. The order shifts according to mood and need. Silence grows longer between tellings. These silences aren't empty. They feel full, almost heavy. Someone pokes at the coals just to hear a sound. Another person stretches, joints cracking softly. The story hasn't ended. It's just resting. What becomes clear over many nights is that the fire doesn't just gather people. It trains them. It teaches patience. It teaches listening without fixing. It allows memory to soften at the edges without losing its core. People leave the circle carrying stories differently than when they arrived. By the time the last coals fade, something has settled. Not a conclusion, more like an agreement. This is where certain stories belong. This is how they survive. By the time fire becomes routine, it's no longer just a tool. It's a boundary, a loose one but real. Inside it, voices behave differently. Outside it, the world goes on in its own way, largely ignored. People learn where the edge of the circle sits, even when the light is low. They don't cross it by accident. Some nights the fire is small, a thin thing, barely enough to push back the dark. Those nights feel tighter. People sit closer than usual, knees almost touching. Stories come out clipped, careful. No one wanders far from what's necessary. The fire won't hold much, so neither will the words. Other nights the fire is strong. It throws heat hard enough that someone shifts back, brushing ash from their hands. These nights invite longer stories, not louder ones, just longer. Someone takes a breath they don't usually take. A detail is added that hasn't been spoken before. It lands quietly, like a stone set down rather than thrown. You start to see how the fire organizes memory without trying. Certain stories won't surface unless the light is right. Others come out too easily in daylight and feel thin by comparison. People don't analyze this. They respond to it. If a story feels wrong in one place, it waits for another. There's a night when someone new speaks more than expected. Their voice is rough, unused to carrying the group. They hold their hands too tightly at first. The story stumbles. No one interrupts. The fire pops softly. The speaker exhales and continues. By the end, their shoulders have dropped. They don't look relieved, just steadier. Objects near the fire take on a different kind of presence. A stick left too close blackens at one end. Stones warm through and hold heat longer than expected. Someone picks one up absent-mindedly and quickly sets it down again, shaking their hand. These small moments ground everything. They remind people where they are, what's real. Children begin to understand which stories are fire stories and which are not. They stop asking for certain ones during the day. They wait. At night, they stay awake longer than they should, eyes heavy but alert. When a story finally begins, they sit up straighter, even if no one told them to. The fire also teaches restraint. Not every story belongs in the circle. Some are too sharp. Some are unfinished in a way that could harm if shared too soon. People learn to hold those back, to keep them for later or for fewer ears. This isn't secrecy, it's care. As seasons turn, the fire remains. It shifts locations, moves with the group. Sometimes it's built against a rock face, sometimes in a shallow pit. The shape changes, but the effect doesn't. Wherever the fire goes, the circle follows, so do the stories. There are nights when no one feels like speaking. The fire burns anyway. People sit, listening to the sound of wood breaking down. Someone hums without realizing it. Another person rubs ash between their fingers, watching it fall. Even without words, something is being held. Eventually, stories begin to shorten near the end of the night. Not rushed, just distilled. A long telling from earlier is reduced to a few lines. Everyone recognizes them. They carry the weight of the whole without needing to say it all again. This is new, a sign that memory is compressing, learning how to travel lighter. When people finally stand, stretching stiff legs, they don't speak right away. The transition out of the circle is slow. Someone kicks dirt over the coals. Another pours a small amount of water, listening to the hiss. The fire fades, but the shape it made lingers. Later, lying down or moving off into the dark, people replay parts of what they heard. Not consciously, it just happens. A phrase repeats, a pause returns. The warmth stays a little while longer than expected. Fire doesn't solve the problem of remembering. It doesn't make anything permanent, but it teaches people how to gather memory, how to slow it down, how to let it change without losing its center. And once that lesson is learned, it doesn't go away. The circle remains, even when the fire does not. Hands begin to slow down before anyone notices they're doing it, not all at once, just here and there. A palm rests longer against a rock while someone listens. Fingers drag across wood instead of lifting away. The motion isn't purposeful yet. It's idle, something to do while words move through the air. Rock faces become familiar, not because they're special, but because people pass them often. A certain flat place near where stories are told, a low wall that catches the light in the morning. Hands follow cracks and bumps, tracing paths that already exist. The stone doesn't change, the hand does. Someone starts repeating the same motion. A curve drawn in dust with a fingertip, wiped away without thought, drawn again. It doesn't mean anything, or maybe it does, but not in a way that can be named. The repetition feels good, settling. The story nearby continues, but the hand keeps working, separate and connected at the same time. Packed earth becomes a surface people test, not writing, just pressure. A stick pressed down and pulled toward the body. A line appears, shallow and uneven, another line beside it. Someone steps through it later, erasing it without comment. No one reacts. The line wasn't meant to last. What's new is that the hand remembers the motion. The next time the stick is picked up, the same shape appears. A spiral this time, slow, careful. Someone watches out of the corner of their eye. They don't ask about it. The shape sits there briefly, then fades as feet pass over it. At first, these marks stay close to the speaker. They appear while a story is being told, not after. The hand moves when the voice moves, pauses when the voice pauses. The marks don't carry the story on their own. They need the sound. Without it, they're just lines. Still, something changes when someone returns to a mark. A finger touches the curve again. The story comes back faster this time, not all of it, just the part that matters in that moment. The mark doesn't explain anything, it reminds. Others begin to notice, not the meaning but the behavior, hands lingering, fingers repeating paths. Someone else tries it, copying the motion without copying the shape. Their line comes out straighter. It doesn't feel right. They rub it away and try again. There's no announcement, no agreement that this is useful, but the practice spreads quietly, mostly during listening, not speaking. It helps the listener stay anchored. The body has somewhere to go while the mind holds the story. Wood becomes important, softer than rock, easier to mark. A branch stripped of bark leaves a pale surface. A fingernail scratches lightly. The sound is faint. Only the person doing it hears it. They pause, then continue more gently. The mark appears anyway. These early shapes don't travel far. They stay near where they're made, near the fire, near the path, near the place where people pause. They aren't carried, they aren't shown off. they're returned to. Children pick this up quickly. They're already used to tracing shapes while listening. Now the shapes linger a little longer. A child draws the same mark each evening, roughly in the same spot. It's gone by morning, but the motion is remembered. The child repeats it without being told to. Someone notices that certain shapes calm people. A slow curve, a set of short lines, nothing sharp, nothing hurried. These shapes appear during difficult stories, loss, danger, waiting. No one points this out. They just keep doing it. The marks still need voices. Left alone, they don't hold. A line scratched into stone without a story nearby feels empty. People glance at it and move on. But when a voice returns, when a hand traces it again, something wakes up. The story steps back into place. This isn't writing. No one thinks it is. There's no belief that the mark can speak by itself. It's more like a place to set something down while you catch your breath. Memory rests there for a moment, then moves on. The ground keeps erasing most of it. Rain smooths dirt. Feet scuff lines away. Wood darkens and swells, but the practice remains. Hands still linger. Fingers still trace. By the end of this stretch, people don't trust marks. Not fully, but they don't ignore them either. They've learned that memory doesn't have to stay entirely inside the body. It can lean, briefly, against the world. Just for a moment. Over time, the shapes begin to drift away from the speaker. Not far, just enough to be noticed. A line scratched near the edge of where people sit. A curve pressed into a patch of earth a few steps from the fire. The voice is still there, still needed, but the hand doesn't always follow it so closely anymore. Someone finishes telling a story and stays kneeling a moment longer. Their hand moves after the words stop. Slowly, almost like they're late to something, they trace a short line, then another beside it. When they stand, the marks are left behind. No one comments. A few people glance down, that's all. Later, someone else passes by and pauses. They don't know what the marks mean. They aren't meant for them, not exactly. Still, they crouch and run a finger along one line. The stone is cool, the groove shallow. Something about the motion feels familiar, even without the story. They straighten and move on. This happens more often. Marks appear, then wait. Sometimes the person who made them returns. Sometimes someone else does. The return isn't guaranteed, but it's possible now. That alone changes things. Memory no longer disappears as soon as the voice stops. It lingers, unclear but present. People begin to experiment without admitting it. A deeper groove, a mark made twice instead of once. Someone presses harder than usual and winces when their finger slips. They suck on the sore spot, then go back more carefully. Pain sharpens attention. The next line is steadier. There's still no attempt to explain anything fully. No one expects a shape to hold a whole story, but certain parts come back more easily when the mark is there. A direction, a count, a warning. Someone touches a set of lines and remembers how many days it took to cross a stretch of land. Not all the details, just enough. Objects start to be chosen for their surfaces. A flatter stone, a piece of wood with fewer knots. Not special, just practical. Someone carries one closer to the fire, sets it down and forgets about it. Later, it's used, not by the same person. That feels important, though no one says why. There's hesitation around this. You can feel it. People don't want to rely too much on marks. They still trust voices more. Voices can answer back. Marks can't. If something is wrong, a speaker can correct it. A line on stone just sits there, quiet, even if it's misleading. So marks stay close to sound. They appear when people are together. They're touched while stories are told. When the group disperses, the marks are left without ceremony. No one checks on them later, not at first. Trust is still thin. Children test boundaries here. They draw shapes that don't match any story, quick, sharp lines, messy spirals. Some are rubbed out immediately, others are ignored. A child waits to see what will happen. Usually nothing does. The mark exists, then doesn't. The lesson is subtle. Not every shape deserves attention. Occasionally, an elder notices a child repeating a shape that does matter, a curve used during a long-remembered warning. The elder doesn't stop the child. They just sit closer next time, letting the motion happen within reach of the voice. The shape and the sound align again. Hands grow more confident, less tentative. The movement becomes smoother, practiced. Someone can trace a familiar shape without looking now. Their eyes stay on the speaker. The body knows where to go. This frees up attention. Listening deepens. There's a moment, small, easy to miss, when someone returns to a mark alone. No story being told. No one watching. They touch the shape, pause, then step away. The memory comes back partially, enough to settle something inside them. This is new, quietly so. Marks still don't last long. A rain washes one away. A rock shifts. A piece of wood is burned for fuel. When this happens, there's a flicker of disappointment, brief, then acceptance. The memory isn't gone, it just has to move again. But something has changed. People notice when a mark disappears. They register its absence. Before, there was nothing to miss. Now there is. That noticing matters. By the end of this stretch, marks are no longer accidents. They're intentional, even if their purpose isn't fully understood. Hands know when to linger, when to trace, when to stop. Memory has learned a new posture, leaning outward instead of folding entirely inward. It still needs voices, still needs bodies close together, but it has found a way to rest, briefly, on stone and wood and earth. And that rest, however short, makes a difference. There's a stretch where marks and voices learn how to share space without tripping over each other. It isn't smooth at first. Someone traces while speaking and loses their place. Someone else focuses too much on the shape and misses part of the story. These missteps don't stop the practice. They slow it down. That's enough. People begin to notice which moments invite the hand to move. Waiting does, counting does, anything that stretches time thin. A line drawn while waiting for someone to return from the dark. A small set of marks added one by one while days are named aloud. The hand keeps pace when the mind might wander. Some shapes start to feel settled, not fixed, but familiar. A spiral that always turns the same way. A row of short lines grouped loosely, never perfectly even. When someone draws them differently, it feels wrong in the body before anyone can say why. The hand corrects itself. The shape returns to its usual form. This doesn't make marks authoritative. No one bows to them, but they gain a kind of presence. When someone hesitates during a story, another person might glance at the ground, then speak. The mark jogs something loose. The voice takes over again. The exchange is quiet, almost private, even though everyone hears it. There's caution too. People test limits carefully. A mark left too far from the group feels exposed. Someone erases it with their heel without being asked. The message is clear enough. Marks belong near people, near sound, near warmth. Left alone too long, they feel unsafe. Weather continues to decide what lasts. A heavy rain flattens a patch of carefully traced earth. In the morning, someone notices and frowns, just for a moment. Then they redraw it while speaking the story again. The motion feels different in daylight. The shape holds anyway. Stone becomes more appealing as people learn this. Harder to mark, but slower to forget. A fingernail won't do much. A sharper edge is needed. Someone uses a broken tool, pressing carefully. The sound is unpleasant, a scrape that makes a few people wince. The mark is shallow, but it stays. Wood offers a middle ground, easier than stone, less fleeting than dirt. A piece of driftwood, pale and smooth, is passed around one evening. People touch it without knowing why. Someone scratches a small curve near one end, then stops. That's enough. The wood is set aside. It's used again another night, then another. No one claims ownership. The mark isn't signed. It doesn't belong to the person who made it. This matters. The group treats it as shared, like a story that anyone can tell if they know it well enough. When someone new traces it, the others watch to see how it's done, not to stop them. Children are given more freedom here. They're allowed to trace over existing shapes, not make new ones yet. Their hands are smaller, their lines wobble. Adults don't correct them unless the shape is completely lost. Even then, the correction is physical, not verbal. A gidding hand, a slowed motion. There's a moment when someone realizes they can step away from a story and come back to it through a mark. Not fully, not safely every time, but enough to matter. They leave a conversation unsettled, return later, touch a shape, and find their footing again. This doesn't replace speaking it out loud. It prepares them to. Marks begin to cluster in certain places, a flat rock near the fire, a section of wall that stays dry. These spots grow busy, then worn. People avoid crowding them too much. They sense that too many marks blur each other. Memory needs space to breathe. Still, restraint holds. No one tries to capture everything. Most stories pass without a trace. Only those that stretch or repeat or weigh heavily seem to invite the hand. The rest are trusted to move on, as they always have. By now, people understand something without naming it. Marks don't carry truth. They carry access. They open a door back to a voice, a moment, a shared understanding. Without the voice, they're quiet. With it, they're steady. When a mark finally lasts longer than expected, surviving a season or many rains, it causes a brief stir. Not excitement, just attention. People touch it more carefully, speak a little slower nearby. The mark isn't celebrated. It's respected the way a well-worn path is. At the close of this chapter, memory hasn't left the body. It hasn't been handed over to stone or wood, but it has learned to pause there, to lean, to catch its breath. Hands still trace, voices still laid. And the world slowly begins to hold more than it used to. The first time someone realizes a mark has lasted, it isn't dramatic. No one calls attention to it. They're just passing by a place they know well, and something looks the same as it did before. Too same. A line where a line shouldn't still be. They stop, not suddenly, more like their body slows without permission. A hand reaches out, fingers brush the surface. The groove is still there, shallow but clear. The person frowns, then smiles a little, not out of happiness, more like surprise that doesn't know what to do with itself. The weather has come and gone since the mark was made. Rain has fallen, wind has pushed dust into corners. Other marks nearby have vanished, as expected. This one hasn't. No one planned for that. It feels like the ground has broken a rule. Others notice soon after. One by one, someone crouches to look closer. Someone else touches it and nods, as if confirming something privately. The story that went with the mark isn't told right away. It doesn't need to be. The mark is enough to hold attention on its own. What follows isn't excitement, it's quiet adjustment. People begin to return to the spot more often than before, not every day, just enough to check. The mark stays. Each time it feels slightly less strange, still new but less fragile. When the story is told again near that place, it sounds different, slower, more careful. The speaker gestures toward the mark without touching it. The mark doesn't move, it doesn't respond. The voice does all the work, but something has changed. The story doesn't have to rush anymore. It can pause and pick up again. Later, someone comes back alone. No story being told, no one else around. They trace the shape with a finger and try to remember the voice that once filled the space. It comes back unevenly, a phrase, a warning, the rest is missing. They guess at it. The guess is wrong, probably. They accept that and move on. What matters is that the mark waited. This waiting alters habits. People begin to associate certain stories with certain places. A flat wall that stays dry, a stone that doesn't shift, a sheltered overhang where wind never quite reaches. These places start to feel heavier, not physically, but in attention. People lower their voices there without being asked. The marks become anchors, not explanations, not instructions, just points of return. If you know the story, the mark helps you find it again. If you don't, the mark offers very little. That's important. It keeps the balance. Voices still matter. Mistakes happen. Someone returns to a mark and remembers the story wrong. They tell it that way. Another person hears and corrects them later, gently. The mark doesn't argue. It allows the error to exist until a voice sets it right. Sometimes no one does. Sometimes it doesn't matter. People notice which surfaces hold better. Soft dirt is mostly abandoned for this purpose. It erases too easily. Stone is favored, though it resists the hand. Wood works if it's sheltered. Walls become important, especially those that face away from rain. People start to see the landscape differently, not as a blank thing, but as a set of possibilities. Children test this eagerly. They return to marks they remember making and feel a thrill when they're still there. They touch them, then look around, hoping someone saw. Often, no one did. The moment belongs only to them. The mark has outlasted their attention span. That feels like something. There's hesitation too. Some people worry quietly that marks might replace listening. They watch to see if others stop paying attention to voices. It doesn't happen. If anything, listening sharpens. The mark gives people confidence that the story won't be lost. If they miss a detail, they can return. Time behaves differently around these places. A story told beside a lasting mark feels less urgent. It doesn't push forward as hard. The future doesn't press so close. The past feels nearer, steadier. People stand differently. They plant their feet. They don't fidget as much. Not every mark lasts. Many still fade. When one disappears, there's a moment of disappointment. Brief. Then the story is told again, and maybe the mark is redrawn, maybe not. The decision is quiet, practical. What's clear now is that memory no longer floats entirely free. It has places to settle, not permanently, not safely, but long enough to change how people move through their days. A story can wait at a wall. It can sit on a stone. It can stay put for a while. Once people accept that a mark can stay, they begin to treat the space around it differently. Not carefully, exactly, more attentively. Feet avoid scuffing too close. Someone brushing past slows their step. A hand reaches out and stops just short, unsure whether to touch or leave it alone. The mark starts to gather a small area of quiet around it. Not silence, just fewer unnecessary movements. When a story is told nearby, people stand a little straighter. Someone who usually paces stays still. The place asks for that without words. People return at odd times, not always when stories are told. Early in the day when light is sharp. Late when shadows stretch long. They check the mark the way you might check the sky. Just to see, just to know it's still there. The act becomes routine enough that it doesn't feel strange anymore. There's a moment when someone realizes they can begin a story by standing near a mark, even if they don't touch it. The mark does some of the work for them. It signals what kind of story this will be. People adjust their attention accordingly. A warning draws a tighter circle. A memory of loss brings softer faces. This changes how stories begin. Fewer introductions, less explanation. The place itself carries context. You don't have to explain why this matters. You're standing there, that's enough. Marks also start to influence what gets remembered. Not everything earns a place. People are selective without being formal about it. A story that only needs to be told once doesn't get marked. One that returns again and again might. The choice isn't debated. It emerges through use. Sometimes two marks end up close together. This causes confusion at first. Someone mixes the stories. Another person steps in and separates them with their voice, pointing from one mark to the other. Over time, people learn the difference. The marks don't change, the understanding does. There's a physical feeling to this shift. You can sense it in how people move through familiar spaces. They no longer pass through without seeing. Eyes drop to walls, hands skim surfaces. The environment stops being just a backdrop. It becomes a partner in remembering. Not everyone is comfortable with this. Some people prefer stories to move freely, unanchored. They worry quietly that tying memory to place could make it brittle. What if the place is lost? What if people stop coming back? These questions aren't spoken, but they shape behavior. Those people continue to tell stories away from marks. Both ways coexist. Mistakes become more visible now. When a story tied to a mark is told wrong, the wrongness lingers. The mark doesn't let it drift away as easily. Someone will notice later and bring it up, not accusingly, just correcting. The group adjusts. The mark stays. The story shifts back into alignment. People begin to notice that some marks feel heavier than others, not because they're deeper or larger, because of what gathers around them. A mark near a place of waiting, a mark near where someone once didn't return. These draw longer pauses, more careful voices. The weight isn't in the stone, it's in the memory that keeps coming back to it. Children learn this quickly. They stop playing loudly near certain marks without being told. They sense when a place is meant for listening. When they do touch a mark, they do it gently, as if it could feel. Over time, people stop trying to remember who made which mark. That detail fades first. It doesn't matter. Ownership dissolves. The mark belongs to the place now, not the hand that traced it. This feels right. Stories have always belonged to more than one person. Now the same is true of their traces. There are moments of quiet joy. Someone returns to a mark after a long absence and finds it unchanged. They hadn't expected it to last. The recognition hits them suddenly. They stand there longer than planned, hand resting against the surface, breathing slow. The story comes back whole this time. That feels like a gift. And there are losses. A wall collapses, a stone cracks, a sheltered place floods. When a mark disappears this way, the reaction is different, sharper. People feel it in their chests. They tell the story again soon after, maybe more carefully than before. The absence is noted, then folded in. What's happening now isn't control, it's settlement. Memory is learning how to sit, how to wait without dissolving. Places are learning how to hold without speaking. People still move, still travel, still tell stories by fire and on the road, but certain places now ask them to return, to stand still, to remember in the same spot someone else once did. That changes the shape of time. The story doesn't just pass through anymore. It stays briefly. Over time, the idea of returning settles in, not as a rule, more like a habit that forms without effort. People begin to pass certain places with a sense of expectation, not that something will happen, just that something could. A story might be waiting there, or at least the edge of one. These places don't look different to an outsider. A wall is still a wall. A stone is still a stone. But for those who know, there's a slight pause when they arrive, a shift in breathing. Someone sets down what they're carrying before they speak, even if it isn't heavy. Marks begin to age, edges soften, lines blur slightly. This doesn't weaken them, it changes how they're read. A fresh mark demands attention, an older one invites patience. People trace them more slowly. They don't rush to remember everything at once. The story comes back in layers. There are times when no one can recall the full story tied to a mark. Only fragments surface. A direction, a feeling, a warning without its reason. This used to cause frustration. Now it's accepted. The mark did its job. It held what it could. The rest moved on. Sometimes a story returns because someone else brings it. A traveler stops at a familiar place and tells a version shaped by distance. The group listens, comparing it silently to what they remember. Differences are noted. Some are corrected. Some are allowed to stand. The mark doesn't settle the argument. It anchors it. This anchoring begins to change how people think about loss. Before, when someone was gone, their stories had to be carried carefully or they would vanish. Now, a place can hold part of that work. A mark made by someone who no longer returns still waits. People touch it and feel the absence more clearly, but also more steadily. Grief has somewhere to go. There's a physical response to this. People stand closer together near older marks. Not always, but often. The space tightens, voices lower. Someone clears their throat before speaking, even if they don't know why. The body recognizes weight before the mind names it. Marks also teach restraint. Not every story should be anchored. People learn this by experience. A mark made for something fleeting feels awkward later. It doesn't draw people back. It sits unused, then erodes. No one mourns it. The environment edits without judgment. Over time, people stop adding marks in a hurry. They wait. A story has to return more than once. It has to prove it needs a place. This waiting feels important. It prevents clutter. It keeps attention sharp. Memory becomes selective without becoming rigid. Children grow up with this system already in place. They don't question it. They learn which places invite touch and which don't. They learn that some stories belong to walls and others belong only to voices in the dark. They make mistakes, of course. Everyone does. The marks forgive that by staying quiet. There's a subtle shift in trust. People begin to trust that a story can outlast them, not entirely, not safely, but enough to matter. This doesn't make them careless. If anything, it makes them more thoughtful. A story tied to a place asks to be told well. Travel changes too. When people leave and return, they check familiar marks. They look for changes, new ones, missing ones. These observations aren't announced. They're absorbed. The landscape becomes a record, uneven and partial, but real. When a mark survives a long time, people stop being surprised. They begin to expect it. That expectation settles into routine. A hand touches stone in passing. A glance checks a wall. Memory becomes part of the environment, like weather or terrain, something you factor in without thinking. This doesn't end uncertainty. Marks can mislead. They can be misunderstood. They can outlast the stories they once helped hold. People accept this risk. They've always lived with risk. This is just a new shape of it. What's different now is that memory no longer depends entirely on who is present. A story doesn't vanish just because no one is there to speak it. It waits, not intact, not complete, but available. Places begin to matter in a new way, not just as shelter or landmarks, but as holders, keepers without voices. They don't explain, they don't correct. They simply remain when they can. By the end of this chapter, memory has learned how to settle without stopping, how to stay without freezing. It has found a way to sit in the world, tied loosely to stone and wall and shelter. Stories still need people, always will. But now, when people leave, something of them stays behind. Quietly. And when they return, the story is already there, waiting for them to pick it up again. The spread doesn't move cleanly. It never does. One place leans into marks and shapes, another keeps them at a distance. Sometimes it's only a few steps apart. A wall covered in careful lines not far from a clearing where no one bothers with them at all. You can feel the difference in how people speak. In some groups, a story begins with a gesture toward a surface. A hand lifts, a finger points, the voice follows. In others, the hands stay empty. The speaker faces the listeners directly, as if to say, this is still enough. No one calls this a disagreement. It doesn't rise to that level, but there's friction, a pause where there didn't used to be one, a look exchanged between listeners. Someone shifts their weight when a speaker turns away from the group to touch a mark. Another person exhales quietly when the story returns to voice alone. Some people lean hard into the marks. Too hard maybe. They rely on them to remember even simple things. They stop mid-story if they can't find the right surface. Their voices thin without the gesture. It's noticeable. The group waits, unsure whether to help or let the silence work. Others resist without saying so. They keep telling stories the old way, even when marks are right there. They speak while standing a little farther back. They don't look at the wall. Their hands stay busy with something else. A strap, a cup, the dirt at their feet. Tools begin to appear quietly, not invented for this purpose, just repurposed. A sharp edge that scratches deeper than a fingernail, a piece of charcoal pulled from the fire, a brush made from rough fibers that leaves uneven strokes. These things make marks more visible. they also make them harder to undo. Using them takes time, time to prepare, time to choose a place, time to clean up afterward. Not everyone has that kind of time. Some people tell their stories quickly, between tasks. They don't stop to make marks. It would slow them down too much. You can see impatience creep in. Someone waits, while another carefully scratches a line, foot tapping. Someone else finishes speaking before the mark is done, leaving the shape unfinished. The mark sits there, awkward, like a thought that didn't quite land. The unevenness shows up in memory too. In places where marks are used often, people expect to see them. They look for them. When they aren't there, something feels off. In other places, marks are almost invisible. People walk past them without noticing. The story lives entirely in the telling. There are moments when this causes trouble. Someone tells a story relying on a mark that the listeners do know. They gesture, expecting recognition. It doesn't come. The story stumbles. Embarrassment flickers across the speaker's face. They start again, this time with words alone. It works, but differently. No one steps in to standardize things. There's no agreement reached. Habits spread where they're useful and stop where they aren't. A group that stays in one place longer uses marks more. A group that moves often doesn't bother. Neither thinks much about the other. Pigment appears next. Not often, not everywhere. Someone mixes ash with fat or water, smears it onto stone. The color holds longer. It's visible from farther away. This draws attention, too much for some. A bright mark feels loud. People argue quietly about whether it's necessary. Some marks are erased on purpose. A heel rubs them out. Water is poured over them. No one confronts the person who does it. The message is enough. This isn't needed here, or not yet. Children navigate this unevenness easily. They copy what's around them. In one place, they point and trace. In another, they listen and repeat. They don't worry about consistency. They adapt faster than anyone else. What's clear is that change isn't sweeping. It's patchy. It moves forward, then stalls. A habit takes hold, then loosens. Someone who relied on marks learns to speak without them again. Someone who resisted starts pointing without realizing it. The old ways don't vanish. They sit alongside the new ones, sometimes comfortably, sometimes not. Memory stretches to accommodate both. It isn't elegant, it's workable. And through all of this, no one says, "This is happening." It just does. The tension shows up most clearly when people have to work together. One person starts explaining something aloud, steady and practiced. Another steps in beside them and begins marking the surface as they speak. The two rhythms don't always match. Words move faster than the hand, or the hand moves ahead, leaving the voice scrambling to catch up. Sometimes it works. The marks and the speech fall into step, and everyone feels it. The explanation lands cleanly, people nod. Someone repeats it later without trouble. Those moments are remembered, even if no one points to them as examples. Other times it doesn't. The speaker grows impatient with the slow scratching. The one making marks feels rushed and makes a mistake. A line goes crooked. A shape is placed wrong. The error lingers longer than a spoken one would have. A few people notice and exchange looks. No one argues, but the unease hangs around. There's a quiet divide between those who have time and those who don't. People who stay in one place longer begin to develop more elaborate marks. They refine them. They add small details. Their surfaces grow crowded. Visitors find them confusing. They need someone to stand beside them and talk anyway. Those who move often keep things simpler. If they mark at all, it's quick. A single line, a rough symbol, something that can be explained in one breath. Anything more feels like a burden. They don't want to carry tools just to remember. Tools themselves become a point of difference. Someone sharpens a piece of bone just for marking. Another person scoffs quietly at that, saying nothing but never using it. Pigment spreads slowly, unevenly. Some places accept it. Others wipe it away as soon as it appears. Color feels like commitment. Not everyone is ready for that. You can hear the old way pushing back in certain voices. People who are good speakers, who have strong memories, don't see the need for marks. They tell stories cleanly, without props. Listeners follow easily. Afterward, someone might gesture toward a nearby wall and suggest adding a mark. The speaker shakes their head lightly, not dismissive, just firm. At the same time, there are people who struggle without marks now. They've grown used to having something to point at. When they try to tell a story without it, they falter. They forget where they are. Someone helps them through, but the dependence is noticed. It makes others wary. None of this is discussed openly. There are no meetings, no decisions. People adjust around each other. They choose who speaks when. They choose when to mark and when to let words do the work. These choices are made moment by moment, guided by comfort and trust. Mistakes teach quickly. A mark that misleads causes more trouble than a misremembered phrase. People remember that. They become cautious about what they commit to stone or wood. The threshold rises. Not everything deserves to stay. At the same time, some marks prove their worth again and again. They're returned to, they're corrected, they're built around. These gain quiet authority, not because they're perfect, but because they've been tested. People don't argue with them much. They don't need to. Children grow up inside this unevenness and don't seem bothered by it. They switch easily. One day they're tracing shapes, the next they're repeating a story word for word. They don't see conflict. They see options. This flexibility keeps things from breaking. There are moments when someone tries to push too hard, to insist that marks are better or that they're unnecessary. Those moments don't last. The group absorbs the pressure and lets it dissipate. Extremes don't hold well here. Balance, even messy balance, lasts longer. What emerges is not a single path forward, but many small ones. A habit here, a pause there, a tool picked up, then set aside. Change advances, retreats, circles back. No one keeps track of progress. There's no sense of before and after. The uneven spread isn't a problem to be solved. It's a condition to be lived with. Memory adapts. It always has. Some days it leans on marks. Some days it carries everything in breath and posture and tone. By now, people understand something important, even if they never say it. Tools don't decide how memory works. People do, their needs, their patience, their willingness to wait or move on. The old way still works. The new way sometimes helps. Neither replaces the other. They exist side by side, unevenly. And that unevenness is what keeps things moving instead of snapping. Over time, people stop trying to sort it out, not because the tension disappears, but because living inside it becomes normal. Someone uses marks one day and ignores them the next. Someone who once resisted begins to gesture without noticing. Another quietly wipes a surface clean before a story starts, preferring open space. The back and forth leaves traces that aren't visible. You can hear it in how stories are told. Some begin with certainty, then loosen halfway through. Others start rough and tighten as they go. The method shifts midstream. No one apologizes for it anymore. There are places where marks slowly take over, simply because they're useful there. Sheltered walls, long-used paths, spots where people wait often. In these places, voices and shapes begin to braid together more smoothly. The resistance softens, not through agreement, but through repetition that proves itself. Elsewhere, marks never quite take hold. They fade or are removed or ignored. Stories in those places stay light and mobile. They travel easily. People there are proud of that, though they'd never say it that way. They like that nothing ties them down. Occasionally, someone from one place visits another and brings their habits with them. They reach for a surface that isn't meant for marking. The locals notice. There's an awkward pause. The visitor reads it and adjusts, or doesn't. Either way, the moment passes. The story continues, shaped by the mismatch. Tools remain unevenly distributed. Some people carry them, others don't bother. A sharpened edge is treated with suspicion in some hands and with care in others. Pigment is used sparingly now after early enthusiasm fades. Too much color feels heavy. It draws attention in ways people aren't always comfortable with. There's a sense that marks demand responsibility. Once something is set down, it asks to be tended, to be revisited, to be corrected if wrong. Not everyone wants that obligation. Some prefer the freedom of speech, where a mistake can be softened or reshaped on the fly. At the same time, people come to rely on a few trusted marks more than they admit. In moments of stress or confusion, they drift toward familiar places without thinking. A hand finds stone, a finger traces a line, the story steadies. No one points this out. It doesn't need to be explained. Arguments still happen quietly, a look held too long, a mark erased when someone wasn't expecting it, a story retold pointedly without gesture. These moments sting briefly, then they're absorbed. The group moves on. Survival has always required flexibility. This is just another version of that. Children grow into this landscape with ease. They don't inherit the early tension. For them, marks and voices have always coexisted. They learn when to use each by watching reactions. They notice which stories draw hands to surfaces and which stay airborne. They don't analyze, they adapt. There's a point where someone realizes they can forget a method without forgetting the story. They can leave a place and still remember, or return and relearn. This loosens the fear that once surrounded change. People stop guarding their habits so tightly. What remains uneven stays uneven. No attempt is made to smooth it out. The variety itself becomes useful. Different situations call for different approaches. A long stay invites marks. A quick crossing relies on voice. Memory stretches to meet both. Looking back, there's no single moment where things tipped. No clear before and after. Just a series of small choices made by different people in different places for different reasons. Some choices stick, others fall away. The old way hasn't failed. It's still there, ready when needed. The newer way hasn't taken over. It helps where it helps and steps back where it doesn't. Together, they form something less fragile than either alone. By the end of this chapter, change is no longer something that arrives. It's something that drifts. It spreads unevenly, settles briefly, moves again. People stop waiting for it to finish. They live inside it. And in that uneven living, memory keeps going, sometimes spoken, sometimes traced, sometimes both at once, held together not by agreement but by use. At first, people expect meaning to arrive quickly. They see the marks multiplying and assume understanding will keep pace. It doesn't. Shapes spread faster than clarity ever could. A line scratched into stone means one thing here, something else a short walk away. A spiral that signals waiting in one place suggests danger somewhere else. No one planned it this way. It just happens. Confusion settles in quietly, not panic, more like a low, steady irritation. Someone points to a mark and expects recognition. It doesn't come. They explain it aloud, a little too carefully. The listeners nod, but you can tell the explanation didn't quite land. The mark still feels loose, unanchored. Children ask questions and don't always get answers. What does this one mean? Why is it there? Sometimes they're told to wait, sometimes to watch, sometimes to draw it again until the motion feels right. The explanation is postponed, not denied. The child learns that understanding isn't immediate. It comes later, if it comes at all. People start to repeat shapes without knowing why. A curve drawn at the edge of a gathering, 3 short lines near a resting place. The repetition isn't empty, but it isn't clear either. It's a holding pattern. The body learns the motion before the mind catches up. That feels uncomfortable for some, reassuring for others. There are moments of real frustration. Someone uses a mark incorrectly and causes trouble. A warning misunderstood. A count misread. The mistake costs time, maybe safety. Voices rise afterward briefly, not in anger exactly, but in strain. The mark is blamed, then the voice, then no one is sure. Some people decide it isn't worth it. They stop using certain symbols altogether. They erase them when they can, or they walk past without looking. Those shapes fade faster than the others, not because they're wrong, but because no one returns to them. Use decides what survives. Other symbols persist, even when no one can fully explain them. They stick because they work. They help people remember when to wait, or where to stop, or how many days have passed. The meaning might be thin, but it's enough. Beauty doesn't factor into it. Clean lines don't matter. Utility does. People begin to wait differently now, not just for stories, but for sense. They don't rush to lock meaning down. They let it hover. A shape might take years to settle, or never settle at all. That uncertainty becomes part of daily life. People stop demanding answers from each other. There's a scene that repeats in different forms. Someone traces a mark and hesitates. They look around, hoping someone older will speak. Sometimes someone does, sometimes no one does. The silence stretches. The person finishes the motion anyway. They step back, unsatisfied, but not defeated. Endurance shows up in small ways. In the patience of repeating a shape that hasn't paid off yet. In the willingness to listen to explanations that contradict each other. In the acceptance that today's meaning might not hold tomorrow. People keep going. That's the remarkable part. Not all confusion is resolved. Some symbols gather too many interpretations and collapse under their own weight. They're avoided. Others narrow over time. One use crowds out the rest. No one announces when this happens. It's noticed only in hindsight, if at all. Adults struggle with this more than children. Children accept waiting more easily. They copy what's around them and trust that sense will come later. Adults want to be sure. They want marks to behave. When they don't, impatience creeps in. Still, most people stay with it. There's a quiet faith underneath all of this, not confidence. Faith is too strong a word, more like a shared hunch, that meaning will catch up eventually, that even if they don't understand everything now, someone else might, someone later. That makes the waiting bearable. Some nights the frustration surfaces plainly. Someone says they're tired of guessing, tired of explaining the same shape again and again. Others listen. No one argues. The complaint is allowed to sit. Then the conversation moves on. The marks remain, some half understood, some misused, some nearly forgotten. People keep tracing them anyway, trusting that repetition itself has value, that the act of trying counts for something even when the result isn't clear. Meaning for now stays just ahead of reach. People learn to live with that distance. Waiting becomes a skill, not one anyone claims to have learned, but one that shows up in posture and breath. People stop leaning forward so much when a mark is explained. They listen, then sit with it. The need to resolve things immediately fades a little. You see it in how marks are approached now. Fewer confident gestures, more pauses. A finger hovers before touching stone. Someone traces a shape slowly, then stops halfway, unsure whether to continue. They don't rush to finish. They let the half mark sit there, unfinished, like a thought left open. Groups respond differently. In some places, someone steps in and completes the shape, confident. In others, no one does. The incomplete mark stays until weather or time removes it. Both outcomes are accepted. The presence or absence of closure stops being a problem to fix. People begin to sort symbols by feel rather than explanation. This one feels settled, that one doesn't. No one says why, it's sensed through use. A symbol that causes repeated confusion loses its pull. People stop returning to it. Another one, even if poorly understood, keeps drawing hands back. That persistence counts for something. There's a moment when someone realizes a symbol has changed meaning without anyone noticing when. A mark once used for waiting is now used for warning. The transition happened slowly, through repeated situations. No one argued about it. The old meaning simply fell out of use. This is unsettling at first, then it becomes familiar. People adjust how they teach. Instead of explaining what a mark means, they show when to use it. They wait for the right moment. They draw the shape while the situation unfolds. The learner watches and imitates. The meaning comes bundled with experience, not definition. This frustrates some listeners. They want clarity, they want to know now. A child presses for an answer and is told, not unkindly, to keep watching. The child frowns, then does. Weeks later, the meaning lands on its own. The delay feels long in the moment. Later, it feels necessary. Marks that survive this period tend to be plain. Simple motions, few lines, nothing ornate. Complex shapes fall away. They take too long to explain and too long to draw. In moments that matter, people reach for what they can make quickly and recognize easily. There are days when people feel stuck. Too many symbols, too little agreement. Someone suggests starting over, wiping a surface clean, and choosing just one mark to keep. The idea doesn't go far. No one wants to erase everything. They've already put too much into it. Instead, people live with overlap. Two marks meaning almost the same thing, one used here, one there. Confusion still happens, but it's expected now. It no longer feels like failure. It's part of the process. You can hear endurance in voices, a steadiness that wasn't there before. Someone explains a symbol for the third time without irritation. Someone listens even though they've heard it before. Patience isn't praised, it's practiced. There are small victories. A child uses a mark correctly without being prompted. An outsider learns a symbol faster than expected. A mistake is caught early and corrected gently. These moments don't stand out much, but they accumulate. They keep people going. Some symbols are intentionally left vague. People stop trying to pin them down. They're used for things that don't need precision, waiting, passing time, acknowledging something without naming it. These shapes hold ambiguity on purpose. They work better that way. Others become sharper through use. A warning symbol grows more consistent. People agree on it without meeting about it. They react the same way when they see it. The body responds before the mind checks details. That reliability matters. Adults slowly let go of the need to oversee every step. They trust younger hands to figure things out in time. This trust is uneasy at first. It feels like letting go of control, but watching understanding arrive on its own teaches patience. Marks are erased less often now, even when misunderstood. People wait to see if clarity comes later. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Either way, the decision feels less urgent. The pace of change slows, not because progress stops, but because people stop pushing it. They accept that meaning grows at its own speed, faster in some places, slower in others, never evenly. By the end of this stretch, people are no longer surprised by confusion. They expect it, they plan around it, they build habits that can tolerate not knowing. The marks remain imperfect, their meanings drift, some never settle. And still, people keep tracing them. By now, the waiting has worked its way into daily life. It isn't just about marks anymore. It's about how people hold questions in general. They don't rush answers the way they once did. They let things sit, let them show what they're good for or not. Some symbols begin to thin out, not erased all at once, just used less. People pass them without stopping. Hands don't reach for them anymore. When someone does trace one out of habit, it feels strange, like saying a word no one else uses. The mark fades soon after. No one mourns it. It had its chance. Others remain, even when their meaning stays loose. A simple curve near a place where people often wait. A rough set of lines near a crossing. These don't explain themselves. They don't need to. People know how to behave around them. That's enough. There's a quiet relief in this. The pressure to understand everything lifts a little. People stop feeling behind. They stop worrying that they've missed something important. If a symbol matters, it will keep coming back. If it doesn't, it won't. This rule proves itself over and over. Teaching changes again. Older people speak less about what a mark means and more about when they noticed it mattered. They tell stories around the symbol instead of about it. The learner absorbs the connection slowly. The shape becomes familiar before it becomes clear. Children grow into this without realizing how much patience it requires. They repeat shapes while waiting for food. They trace lines while listening to long conversations. They don't ask what it all adds up to. They trust that it will someday. Watching them, adults remember how to wait. There are moments when understanding arrives suddenly. Someone uses a symbol in just the right moment and everything clicks. The group feels it. A few people nod at once. No one cheers. The satisfaction is quiet but real. Those moments don't happen often. When they do, they stick. Most of the time, clarity comes in smaller pieces. A symbol works in one situation, then another. Confidence builds gradually. The meaning narrows, not perfectly, enough to be useful. That's the standard now. Some frustration remains. It always will. There are days when nothing seems to make sense, when marks feel cluttered and explanations thin. On those days, people lean back on older habits. They tell stories without touching anything. They listen the old way. This still works. It's comforting. The coexistence of waiting and knowing becomes normal. People stop seeing them as opposites. Waiting is part of knowing now. You don't get one without the other. This understanding isn't spoken. It shows up in how long people are willing to sit with uncertainty. Marks that survive this period do so because they earn their place, not by being clear at first, but by being returned to, again and again. Use sharpens them, neglect dulls them. No one manages this deliberately. It happens through countless small choices. By the end of this chapter, meaning hasn't caught up completely. It never does, but people no longer expect it to sprint. They walk at its pace. They adjust their steps. They keep going. The marks are still imperfect. Their interpretations still drift, but the frustration has softened into something else, a steady endurance, a willingness to try again tomorrow. People have learned how to wait without giving up. And in that waiting, understanding grows, slowly, unevenly, and just enough to matter. At first, no one notices how much has accumulated. Each mark, each story felt manageable on its own, but together they begin to crowd the edges of daily life. A wall fills. A sheltered stone holds more lines than it used to. People walk past and feel the weight before they name it. Stories start stacking up. Old warnings sit beside newer ones, and the difference between them isn't always clear. Someone pauses, trying to remember if a mark still matters or if it belongs to a time that's already passed. The mark doesn't answer, it just stays. People keep copying things, sometimes without thinking. A familiar shape gets redrawn because it always has been. A story is repeated because it feels wrong not to repeat it. No one checks every detail anymore. There isn't time. The day presses in, tasks wait. You can hear the strain in conversations. Someone says, "We already know this," but still goes on. Another person interrupts, not to argue, but to move things along. The story shortens, pieces fall away. No one marks which pieces those were. Memory feels crowded now, not broken, just full. People carry it the way you carry too much in your arms, carefully aware that something might slip. When it does, there's a flicker of irritation, then acceptance. It happens more often. New routines begin to form, not planned, just practical. Someone refreshes a mark that's still useful, darkening lines that were fading. Another lets a nearby mark wear down without fixing it. They don't say why they chose one over the other. The choice feels obvious in the moment. People start to sort without ceremony. This stays, that can go. Decisions are made quickly, sometimes badly. A mark erased too soon, another kept longer than it should have been. The mistakes add to the weight instead of relieving it. Still, the sorting continues. It has to. There's a change in how people talk about the past. It feels closer, heavier, less flexible. Stories don't bend as easily as they once did. Someone tries to adjust a detail and is met with resistance, not sharp but firm. The mark is there. The story has settled around it. Changing it now feels harder. This makes some people uneasy. They miss the looseness of earlier telling. the way stories could adapt without friction. Now, adapting takes work. You have to move around what's already been set down. Sometimes it's easier to leave things as they are, even if they don't quite fit anymore. Objects show the strain too. A bundle of stones grows unwieldy. Someone drops one and doesn't bother to pick it up. A carved stick runs out of space. New marks crowd the old ones. The order becomes unclear. Someone turns the stick over, hoping the other side is empty. It is. Children notice the clutter differently. They ask why there are so many marks in one place, why some stories sound old and tired. The answers aren't satisfying. They're told, this is how it is, or we might need this later. The child shrugs and goes back to tracing lines, unconcerned. People develop habits to cope. They tell fewer stories at once. They choose carefully what to bring forward, or they rush through everything. Hopping speed will keep the weight from settling. Both approaches work for a while. There are moments when someone suggests clearing a surface completely, starting fresh. The idea hangs in the air, heavy with possibility and fear. What would be lost? What might finally be lightened? No one acts on it yet. The risk feels too large. Instead, people live with the crowding. They adjust their grip. They rest when they can. They carry what's been handed to them, even when it feels excessive. Letting go is still harder than holding on. The past presses closer now. It doesn't trail behind the way it once did. It sits alongside, demanding attention. People feel older under its weight, even the young ones. Memory has bulk now. It takes up space. And still, it's carried forward. Not because it's easy. Because leaving it behind feels worse. The weight changes how people move. You can see it in small adjustments. Someone stands in front of a familiar wall and hesitates before speaking, scanning what's already there. They rub their hands together, then choose a spot that's less crowded. The story comes out careful, trimmed down before it's even finished. People begin to develop informal filters, not rules, more like instincts. This one still matters. That one probably doesn't. The decisions aren't always right, but they're necessary. Without them, everything would grind to a halt. Too much to say, too much to point at. Old warnings sit in awkward places. A mark made for a danger that no longer exists stays visible, while a newer one competes for attention nearby. Someone tells both stories out of caution. Another person sighs quietly. They've heard it before. They've lived long enough to know which one applies now. Still, they listen, just in case. Refreshing a mark becomes an act of judgment. Someone darkens lines with pigment or deepens a groove with a sharp edge. The decision signals importance, whether intended or not. People notice. They adjust their attention. A refreshed mark draws eyes. A fading one slowly loses them. There's discomfort around this. Who decides what stays clear? Who lets something fade? No one wants to claim that role outright. Choices are made indirectly, by showing up, by touching one mark and not another, by telling one story again and letting another sit untouched. Some people take on the work more often. They maintain surfaces. They revisit old marks, checking them against current needs. This isn't a formal position. It's something they fall into because they're patient or because they remember more than most. Others rely on them without naming it. Gratitude is quiet, so is resentment. Mistakes become more visible now. A mark refreshed out of habit turns out to be misleading. A story carried forward too long causes confusion. When this happens, there's a sense of having wasted effort. Time spent maintaining something that should have been released. People feel it sharply, then move on. There's no time to dwell. At the same time, some things are kept longer than expected, not because they're still useful, but because no one can quite let them go. A story tied to someone who's gone. A mark that's been there for as long as anyone can remember. Removing it feels wrong, even if no one uses it anymore. So it stays, taking up space. Memory begins to feel less nimble. Adjustments take longer. New stories have to find room among old ones. Someone tells a recent event, and instinctively compares it to 3 older stories before finishing. The past presses in, shaping interpretation before the present has fully landed. You can hear this heaviness in voices, the easy variation of earlier telling titans. People are cautious about changing details. A story that's been marked feels harder to bend. The mark gives it a kind of stiffness. This brings comfort and frustration at the same time. Some respond by pulling back. They tell fewer stories. They avoid marked places when they can. They rely on memory the old way, light and mobile. Others lean in, trying to organize what's there. They cluster related marks. They retell old stories in new groupings. Neither approach solves the problem. Both keep things moving. Children grow up surrounded by this density. For them, it's normal. They don't remember a time when memory was lighter. They learn early how to skim, how to recognize which stories need attention and which can be passed over for now. Their questions are sharper. Why do we still keep this one? Sometimes there's no good answer. Sorting becomes a routine task, not daily, not scheduled. It happens in moments between other things. Someone erases a small section while waiting. Someone adds a mark, then pauses, reconsidering, and rubs part of it away. These half-decisions accumulate. There are days when the weight feels almost too much, when someone stands in front of a crowded surface and turns away, choosing not to speak at all. Silence becomes a way of not adding to the pile. No one pushes, everyone understands. What's changed most is the sense of obligation. Carrying the past no longer feels optional. It feels assigned, even if no one remembers when the assignment was made. People shoulder it because others have before them, because dropping it would leave a gap that feels dangerous. And yet within this burden, choice has entered. Uneven, imperfect, sometimes clumsy, people decide what to refresh, what to repeat, what to let dim. These decisions shape memory more than any mark ever could. The past is heavier now, but it's also being handled. Eventually, people begin to feel the cost of carrying everything, not all at once. It shows up in small refusals. Someone skips a story they would have told before. Someone else leaves a mark unrefreshed, even though they notice it fading. These aren't dramatic choices. They're quiet, almost accidental. Still, they add up. There's a sense now that not everything deserves to move forward. This idea feels dangerous at first. Letting go always has. People worry about what might be lost, what might be needed later. The past has a way of making demands long after it's finished. Ignoring those demands feels risky. But the weight forces the issue. Carrying too much slows everyone down. Decisions that used to be quick take longer. A simple story turns into a long review of what's already known. People grow tired before the telling is done. The group feels it and adjusts, even if no one says why. New habits form around this pressure. Some people start summarizing without meaning to. They tell the short version and watch reactions. If listeners lean in, they continue. If not, they stop. The rest of the story stays untold. This becomes a kind of test, not formal, just felt. Marks reflect this change. New ones are simpler, fewer lines, less detail. People hesitate before adding anything permanent. They ask themselves silently, will this still matter later? The question doesn't always have an answer. Sometimes the mark is made anyway, sometimes it is. Old marks continue to fade unevenly. Some are deliberately refreshed, kept alive through effort. Others are left to soften and blur. When one finally disappears, people notice. There's a pause, a brief inventory of what's gone. Then life continues. The absence settles into place. There's relief in this, mixed with guilt. Letting something go lightens the load, but it also feels like failure. People carry both feelings at once. They don't resolve them. They don't need to. The work is ongoing. The past now feels layered instead of continuous. Not everything is held at the same distance. Some stories sit close, heavy and detailed. Others recede, becoming outlines. People learn to live with this unevenness. They stop expecting a complete picture. they work with what's closest. Occasionally, someone regrets a choice. A mark that was allowed to fade turns out to matter again. The story has to be reconstructed from memory alone. It comes back altered, thinner. People accept this version because it's all there is. The loss is felt, then folded into the story itself. At the same time, some things prove surprisingly durable. Stories people thought they could drop keep returning. They're retold even without marks. They find new shapes. These earn their place again, not through effort, but through persistence. People notice and make room. There's a change in how elders speak now. Less urgency, more selectivity. They don't try to pass on everything. They choose what to emphasize. They trust that some things can be rediscovered later or not at all. This trust feels earned, not naive. Children sense the shift too. They ask fewer questions about old marks. They focus on what's used often. They learn early that memory isn't a complete record. It's a working one. This understanding doesn't trouble them. It feels natural. The weight of the past doesn't disappear. It never will. But it's redistributed. Some of it is set down. Some carried more lightly. Some handed off to places, to marks, to routines. The load becomes uneven but manageable. By now, people no longer believe they can keep everything. That belief fades quietly, without ceremony. In its place comes something more practical, a willingness to choose, to risk loss in order to keep moving. The past is still there, dense, complicated, sometimes overwhelming. But it no longer has to be carried whole. People carry what they can. They leave the rest where it lies. And they keep going. Silence feels different now, not empty, not dangerous. It has weight, but it no longer presses the same way it once did. People move through spaces filled with stories without needing to stop every time. A wall holds lines. A bundle sits on a shelf. No one feels rushed to speak just because they're there. This takes getting used to. At first, people still slow down out of habit. They glance at the marks as they pass. Sometimes a hand lifts, then drops again. Not now, later. The story can wait. That thought is new enough to feel strange, like leaving food untouched because you know it will still be there in the morning. Shelves appear quietly, not as a grand idea, just boards set across supports, flat places to put things down. Bundles of marked pieces rest there, tied loosely. Some are opened often, others sit undisturbed, gathering dust. People know which are which without checking. Walking past a story without listening to it feels wrong at first, almost rude. Silence used to mean loss. If no one spoke, something slipped away. Now silence can mean pause, storage, trust. The shift isn't announced. It settles in gradually through use. You see it in daily movement. Someone passes a wall covered in marks and doesn't stop. They're on their way somewhere else. The story will still be there when they return. This confidence changes posture. People stand straighter. They move faster. The past no longer tugs at them constantly. The voice isn't gone, far from it. People still gather said stories aloud, but they don't feel obligated to repeat everything. A story can be told once, then set aside, or told again much later. The urgency fades, with it some of the strain. Silence begins to carry permission. You don't have to speak to keep something alive. You don't have to listen every time to prove you care. This loosening is subtle, but it reaches deep. People breathe differently around memory now. The old nights by the fire don't disappear. They just change. Stories told there are fewer, more chosen. Some are spoken softly, knowing they don't need to carry everything. Others are left unspoken because their shapes already exist somewhere nearby, waiting. There's an odd moment when someone realizes they can forget on purpose. Not erase, not destroy, just let something rest without holding it in mind. The relief surprises them. Forgetting no longer feels like failure, it feels like delegation. Objects reflect this change. Bundles aren't opened as often. Marks aren't refreshed every time they fade slightly. Some things are allowed to sit untouched for long stretches. dust gathers. No one rushes to wipe it away. Dust becomes a sign of patience, not neglect. Children grow up inside this new quiet. They don't assume silence means danger. They play near shelves without being warned. They pass walls without asking what every mark means. They learn that some stories will come to them later, when needed. This trust feels natural to them. Adults take longer to adjust. Some still feel uneasy leaving stories alone. They check more often than necessary. They revisit marks just to reassure themselves they're still there. Over time, even that fades. The stories don't need guarding anymore. Something is gained here. Time, space, energy. People aren't always carrying the full weight of memory in their voices and bodies. They can focus on what's in front of them. The present grows clearer when it isn't crowded by constant recall. Something loosens too. The tight bond between story and speaker relaxes. A story doesn't belong only to the voice that tells it now. It can sit, waiting for another listener, another moment, another way of hearing. This changes how people think about themselves. They begin to accept that parts of them will remain after they leave a place, not just in memory, but in marks, in bundles, in quiet waiting. This isn't immortality, it's something smaller, more grounded. There's humility in it. You don't control how you'll be heard later. You don't get to explain yourself again. You leave something behind and trust that whoever finds it will make sense of it in their own way. Silence makes room for that trust. The fire still burns some nights, voices still gather, but the circle doesn't have to hold everything anymore. When people leave, they don't worry as much about what might be lost in the dark. The stories know how to sit now. And silence, once feared, has learned how to hold. As this quiet settles in, people start to notice how much of their day is no longer spent carrying stories out loud. Mornings move faster. Tasks don't pause as often to explain themselves. A person can begin something and trust that the background knowledge is already there, resting somewhere nearby. Silence fills the gaps between actions instead of words. Someone sharpens a tool without narrating why. Another sorts through a bundle and ties it back up without comment. The work gets done either way. This feels efficient, but also a little strange. The habit of speaking through everything fades slowly. There are moments of discomfort. Someone assumes a story is known because it's stored, but the listener hasn't encountered it yet. Confusion follows, not panic, just a brief mismatch. The story is retrieved, unfolded, spoken. Everyone adjusts. Silence didn't erase it, it only delayed it. People begin to recognize different kinds of quiet. There's the quiet of neglect, when something is forgotten because no one returns to it. And there's the quiet of trust, when a story rests because it doesn't need attention right now. Learning the difference takes time. Some mistakes happen along the way. Walking past shelves becomes an ordinary act. At first, people counted how many bundles were there, how full the space had become. Now they don't. The sight blends into the environment. Memory becomes part of the architecture, something you live among, not something you constantly handle. The old urgency around teaching eases. Elders don't feel the same pressure to pass everything on before it's too late. They know things will remain, even if their voice doesn't. This softens them. They speak more selectively, more personally. When they tell a story now, it's because they want to, not because they're afraid it will vanish. Children benefit from this in ways no one expected. They aren't overwhelmed by constant instruction. They learn through proximity instead. They grow up surrounded by stored stories, absorbing them gradually. When they ask questions, the answers can wait. There's no rush. At the same time, something intimate shifts. Stories that once lived only in shared breath now exist apart from the speaker. This creates distance. A story told from a shelf doesn't carry tone the same way. It doesn't adjust to faces. It doesn't pause when someone looks away. People notice this loss. Some try to compensate. They add notes, extra marks, clarifying gestures etched into surfaces. Others accept the difference. They understand that what's gained isn't the same as what's lost. It's adjacent, useful in a different way. Firelight gatherings feel more intentional now. Fewer people come just to hear what's already known. They come for what can't be stored easily. Questions, doubt, grief, stories that need a human presence to make sense. The fire becomes a place for what resists being set down. Silence makes these gatherings feel smaller, even when they are. The voices that do speak carry more weight. No one rushes to fill pauses. Everyone knows the shelves are there. The silence doesn't threaten forgetting anymore. It creates space for feeling. There's a new kind of loneliness too. A person can leave something behind and never see who encounters it later. They won't know how it's understood. This uncertainty sits quietly in the background. Some people find it unsettling. Others find it freeing. Trust grows slowly. Trust that the stories won't be mishandled too badly. Trust that being misunderstood isn't the end of things. People have always been misunderstood. Now it just happens across time as well as space. Silence starts to feel like an agreement rather than an absence. An understanding that not everything needs to be spoken immediately, that listening can happen later, that memory doesn't collapse the moment voices stop. You see this agreement in small gestures. Someone closes a bundle carefully instead of reopening it. Someone chooses not to retell a story they know well, letting it remain where it is. These decisions feel deliberate, even when they're made without much thought. The present grows louder in its own way. With less constant retelling of the past, people notice what's happening now more clearly. Sounds, movements, expressions. Silence sharpens attention instead of dulling it. By this point, silence has become active. It's doing work, holding space, allowing things to settle. People stop fearing it. They stop rushing to fix it. They let it be. In time, the quiet becomes something people rely on, not always consciously. It's just there, holding things in place. A person can leave for a long stretch and return without feeling like everything has slipped away in their absence. The shelves are still there. The walls haven't moved. The stories wait without complaint. This changes how people think about absence. Being gone no longer means being erased. Someone can step away and trust that part of them remains, set down somewhere solid. This trust doesn't erase loss, but it softens it. Departure becomes less final, return less urgent. You see it in how people leave places now. They don't repeat everything one last time. They don't gather everyone to make sure nothing is forgotten. They check a bundle, touch a surface, then go. The gesture is small, almost casual. Still, it carries weight. Silence also reshapes memory itself. People stop holding stories at the front of their minds all the time. They allow them to recede. When a story is needed, it can be retrieved. Until then, it rests. This frees attention for other things: work, observation, rest. There's a cost to this, and people know it. A stored story doesn't grow the way a spoken one does. It doesn't adapt to the listener. It doesn't soften or sharpen itself in response to faces in front of it. Some stories lose something when they sit too long. Their edges dull, their warmth fades slightly. People compensate when they can. They retell certain stories aloud, even if they're stored, not because they have to, but because they want to keep them alive in the old way. These retellings feel different now, less frantic, more chosen. The voice adds what the mark can't. Silence also makes room for forgetting that doesn't hurt. Some things are never retrieved. They sit, then eventually disappear. A bundle is untied years later and found empty. A mark erodes beyond recognition. When this happens, there's a brief sadness, then acceptance. Not everything was meant to last forever. What remains is what continues to matter, not because it was preserved perfectly, but because people kept returning to it. The balance between keeping and letting go feels more natural now, less like a failure, more like maintenance. Firelight still draws people together, but the conversations there are different. They aren't burdened with carrying everything forward. They wander, they pause, They sit with uncertainty. The stories told there are often unfinished by choice. The rest can be found later or not at all. Children raised in this world don't see silence as a gap to be filled. They see it as part of how things work. They grow comfortable with not knowing right away, with trusting that answers exist somewhere, even if they aren't needed yet. This patience changes them. Adults watching this learn something too. They learn that they don't have to be present for every act of remembering, that their role can end without everything ending. This realization is quiet but profound. The world now holds pieces of people in many places, in marks that wait, in bundles that rest, in shelves that gather dust. Leaving something behind no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like participation in something larger than one life. Silence becomes the space between voices where time can move, where stories can travel without being carried by breath alone, where meaning can arrive later, shaped by someone else's hands and eyes. Nothing about this is perfect. Stories are misunderstood, some are never found, others are found too late. People accept this as part of the arrangement. The alternative, holding everything tightly all the time, no longer feels possible. So they live with the quiet. They walk past stories without stopping. They trust that someone, someday, will pause where they did and listen in their own way.